Tell us about Palestine Regeneration Team. What are some aspects, apart from spatial interventions, that the practice is concerned with?
Palestine Regeneration Team is a research by design group. It kind of was born as a continuation to our practice, which is the architecture practice. But the research by design is really aiming to, well, it started by looking particularly into the context of Palestine, trying to think of creative means to rethink this contested landscape, bringing in design and research into it. But we were particularly interested in this aspect of life projects and how to think of creative means to rethink, bring life back to some kind of contested geography. So we were working with different partners in Palestine, whether it is to deal with heritage or to deal with the Gaza self-build, or even to deal with ways to rethink and redraw the map. So it has a dual action or function. Some of the activities are what we call speculative, which are related to kind of like a mental imagination, creative imagination of the landscape, and the others are on the ground, where we bring our creative aspect and see how we can apply it. We scale 1-to-1 into the ground.
And it was one of the key, if you like, generator of the idea of setting up Palestine Regeneration Team, which was part, really was due to the fact that there are so many, over the past sort of few decades, there has been quite a lot of scholars who've done research, who've seen how, looked at the power of the occupier, the power of the, if you like, the governing bodies that occupy and control the invisible communities. And we thought that there was a need, there was a gap, there was a need for creating hope, trying to actually show the empowerment of the communities, or the invisible communities. In the case, of course, in the case of Palestine and Gaza, we wanted to see and celebrate and extend and protect what the initiative that they were taking already, which was demonstrating their resilience towards, if you like, oppression or their constraints and siege and so on. So we thought it was very important that we bring back hope and we build on the resilience of the community.
How important are an individual's identity and personal experiences when working in a colonized and scarcity-ridden landscape? Can an outsider ever equitably and ethically contribute towards the welfare of the populace in such regions?
Every individual can have an impact. Every individual, from whatever profession, skills, they can help. But then it has to be a collaborative, participatory action.
We're very aware of this aspect, especially when it comes to contexts like Palestine or any colonial context. Really, we feel, the voice of the locals themselves and their own reading and their own interpretation and their own voice is really what we're trying to get heard. So when we think about drawing or redrawing maps, we think about the voice of the locals. I mean, we're locals ourselves. We don't see ourselves as outsiders because we're part of that context. But that's kind of like on the forefront of our work, because one of the key aspects that Palestine had to deal with spatially is also context of maps and mapping that has always been drawn by the colonial, which happened to be the more powerful. So we're also trying to argue that there is an alternative way of drawing and redrawing from a local perspective. So that's why it's in the forefront that whatever we do it from a local lens, not from an outsider's lens.
While art and architecture often manage to soothe and empower communities, how can architectural projects and interventions be used to subvert the occupation? On the other hand, how are these mediums employed to help strengthen the occupation?
You know, whenever it comes to regions such as Palestine, we feel particularly with, if I may say, the failure of the political agenda. We feel that it's really the role of art and the role of architecture that really should now stand in the forefront to combat occupation. It's us architects, the creative industry, that have a very important role to play. But most importantly, this is very necessary because in the context of Palestine, given that we've been under 75 years of occupation, if not more, we need new means to narrate Palestine, new means to rethink Palestine. And there is no way better than art and architecture and literature to kind of narrate that and make the voice of people heard spatially. So it is the time now that we use it. And it's very important to use it, particularly also because the colonizer has been using a lot of tools to occupy, to divide. For us, architecture is about hope, stitching, and healing. And there are so many innovative ways of doing that. I mean, I always keep referring to an amazing journalist called Amira Haas. She used to say that in the case of Palestine, Israel used to play chess, where Palestinians used to play ping pong, right, in the sense that ping pong is always reactionary, and maybe there is an active role versus a passive role. In the case of art and architecture, Palestinians are also playing a very interesting, creative, innovative chess game, which portrays how creative and innovative the Palestinians are. It builds and celebrates on their practices. They are not, as may be portrayed, a passive audience in the sense that Israel makes architecture and Palestinians react to it. If anything, we are trying to kind of celebrate and acknowledge that Palestinians are very creative in making space, and we're just being facilitators to take that forward.
Just to take that further, so in a way, the role of an artist and an architect, we were at an event on Friday, on Sunday, a few days ago, at Tate Modern in London, where there was a good number of artist workers and artists for Palestine. There were poetry, music, sounds. The poetry was very interesting because it was poetry written from one of the residents in Gaza, and it was expressing, sharing their feeling, their moments of bombing, the moment of oppression, the moment of resilience, but also mostly the survival. But also, so the art can very much play a key role, as Yara said, of expressing what is there. And I think with architecture, especially when it comes to colonialism, is to facilitate the alternative which can take our dependency, meaning those who are colonized, the dependency of colonized to the colonizer. And also it can celebrate, importantly, the very, if you like, resilient practices. We can offer alternatives, which is powerful, which can provide economic independence, spatial independence, social interaction, etc. So it's kind of both. It's very interesting because there is a very close dialectical, I would have said, relationship between what the artist does, what the architect can do in decolonizing and resisting that colonization.
Tell us about the invisible entities that you refer to in the exhibition and the role they play in upending and challenging hegemonic systems.
The exhibition is titled The Power of the Invisibles, as you know, and it is particularly addressing Gaza, trying to showcase the power of a community and a context that has been made invisible by the colonial forces of power, but also by a capitalist system that tends to kind of subjugate the weak and leave their landscapes scarred. So we wanted to celebrate Gaza by bringing their story forward. The exhibition is a kind of a multimedia. There is a film projection as well as an installation. In the film projection, we wanted to show the absurdity that Gaza has turned into, while the destruction has been taking place, where a city has been really turned into a ruin and a refugee camp. But equally, we wanted also to celebrate and show the creative and innovative skills that those invisibles have done throughout the years in trying to rebuild their homes. So we've also converted the exhibition space into what we called an experimental lab, which is a self-build initiative that we have started back in 2010 when we went to Gaza to respond to the destruction that happened after the war. So this experimental lab is very much about us testing and working with available materials from the rubble to kind of rethink Gaza and rethink a new skin, but most importantly, to think new ways for self-help with the community. So while the film is showcasing this absurd reality of Gaza, it's also showing the future of what it could be if we are to rebuild, taking advantage of these building materials.
Yeah, what is important also to note is the way that we transform the gallery. We actually specifically reduced the size of gallery, transformed it to what Yara called the experimental laboratory, but it's a typology that can be used in a way. It's a typology that offers a process, a practice based process, which is applicable to what we call post-conflict or places where there's the context, the rapid context, which there's constraint. So we are offering in this alternative methods, which is in this case, as Yara said, was inspired by what was happening in Gaza in 2010 anyway, and then later. So we're offering an alternative architectural practice, an alternative approach to materials, to resources that are available in the context, that it is not going to be, doesn't rely on importing and consumption of materials from the colonizers or from the global market, that we have been, if you like, convinced that that is the material to use in order to go to the modern world or civilized world or whatever world they're trying to sell you. So we think that it offers an alternative aesthetic, an aesthetic that we think is in itself. So using the existing materials, recycling, reappropriating what is there. We are aware that everybody, we live in a modern condition, we live in a contemporary, we have a contemporary needs within our contemporary lifestyle. So therefore, whatever material we use, it has to be reappropriated to our modern contemporary lifestyle. However, we say that it does need a new approach and a new aesthetic needs to be developed. And this is what we're trying to do, trying to say that, yes, we can build from Earth. Yes, we can build, and building up from Earth could be very beautiful. As you see when you enter, there is a kind of a component which is made of rammed earth. It's very beautifully done, very special, expert, highly technical, highly sophisticated. Then we have clay panels, which is to do evaporating cooling, but it takes clay from the ground, reshapes it, and creates a situation where you can actually reduce the use of resources and save energy, and so on and so on. So all the elements is carefully identified as in showcase to show that you can create an alternative technology, can create an alternative aesthetics working with what is available. And that is post-conflict condition. It can be Gaza, it can be Morocco, it can be in Ukraine, even in Syria, places where there is siege, there is sanction, there is limitation. So what you go there and say, right, what can we do to recreate alternatives that can still work with contemporary lifestyle, that is green, that reduces the damage to the ecology, and does not rely on consuming from outside, which is very important.
We see this lab as a traveling lab in the sense that this idea of accumulating knowledge, the idea of testing and experimenting with different materials is an ongoing process where we travel and move to different people, experts, professionals who have creative and innovative ways of working with available materials, and more importantly, rubble, as the case of Gaza. And maybe there is kind of like this aspect of creating what we call an atlas of materials, or an atlas of innovative techniques that keep piling up. And they're not only specific to Gaza, we're learning from the Gazans, we learned from them, we used their techniques, and then we're moving this to the West Bank, and then came to Sharjah, and then maybe it comes back to London. And I just wanted to kind of reflect. Greta Thunberg said this interesting slogan in one of her demos recently, saying no climate justice in occupied land. The work that we're trying to do is also to tackle climate justice, trying to find means to improve the living conditions of the locals, because if we are to think of ways to empower, we also need to think of ways to heal the ecology and the climate, for them to think of creative means to clean water, or to think of passive heating or passive cooling. Kind of in the case of colonized context, the climate is an emergency, it's not a luxury. And this is another kind of layer that we're trying to address in that exhibition.
The definitions of liberty, progress, empowerment, and development have been hardlined by the West in an indelible fashion, such that it also bears semblance to the lifestyle of the colonizer. How can the colonized re-embrace aesthetics that are specific to their histories and lived realities?
It's exactly part of what we call the alternative aesthetic, the alternative practice. There's this theory called the soft power. The soft power is a theory which actually started very much. Its basis started probably more like 1950s, 1960s, where the colonizer would sell you indirectly their lifestyle. And that's everywhere. And that's in the TV, in the films, in the fashion, in building form, in household materials, objects, They create a situation where we desperately believe that in order to, as you say, in order to be modern, in order to be so-called civilized, and so on, we need to have those materials. We need to have that cigarette. We need to have that wine. We need to have that machine in our house. We need to have that type of material in our building. We need to have glass. We need to have steel. We need to have et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then when they come to give that product to us, it's actually not them convincing us. We're already convinced. We've already been told that our lifestyle would be a modern, civilized, whatever, progressive lifestyle. If we have those images, if we actually have those marks, those what is it? It's like fashion brands, you see. And fashion brands is also applicable not only to the clothes, but also to buildings. But that's why when you move from different now global cities to another global city, the type of architecture you get is almost exactly the same, whether it's in London, whether it's in Baku, whether it's in UAE, you name them, you go to these places, they all have similar buildings with same materials and so on in there, even to the point where the so-called green technology that's been sold to us under the name, well, we're saving the environment, but actually it's a money-making industry. Which is why what we're saying is that we need an alternative which rejects this consumer import of materials and lifestyle, and look at what we've been doing. We, meaning the majority of people in the global south and in different parts of the world, where they developed over the years, especially pre-20th century, developed techniques to address environmental issues, climate, to address heat, cold, etc. We develop incredible techniques, but those have been wiped out because they would last longer, they're cheaper, they're effective. So capitalism arrives, they have to produce, they have to sell. So you need to produce materials, you need to produce lifestyle that is wasteful, that is so production and an accumulation of production of is the key thing for what we call colonizer. It was actually capitalism and the capitalist market economy that is the driving force behind many of these colonial acts, because they have this whole machinery of production, and that has to produce. So the creative destruction, which is the theory of creative destruction, is what capitalism survives on. You destroy, you create war, you create religious, under the religious, under the race, under whatever it is, you create war in different parts of the world. You destroy so that you can go and rebuild and sell your product. So the resistance has to be at all levels. Awareness that yes, we should avoid any form of conflict. Peace is the only way.
But also the power to enact change and reject. I mean, in this case, we are not obsessed as architects with creating a monumental object. If anything, it's that power of impermanence, with the fact that things may be ephemeral, may appear and disappear, may be reappropriated by the local community, may change dress and redress itself, becomes a form of resilience and a new aesthetic and a new identity. And we're not shying away from that. We're not feeling the ego of, in such a context, the architect has to put they have to put their ego aside, because it's the community who has to make space, and we're only seen as facilitators. And we feel there is power in that, and we would like to celebrate it, and that's what we're trying to do in the idea of rebuilding or restitching Gaza.
And this kind of imagery that one has been sold, it's not a new thing. In fact, the whole basis of when we were doing a research on the White City in Tel Aviv in the 1920s and 1930s, and 1940s, right the way through, even before the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 in Palestine and Palestinian land, the architecture, the new kind of settlements were being built, and there were planning laws, planning regulations that insisted that any signs of Orientalism, any sign of architecture Oriental they didn't say Palestinian, but localized Oriental culture was banned, was not given any planning permission. And this was very important because it was trying to say a number of things. One, that what was there, what has been built by the indigenous, by the original community is backwards. So we bring a new modern kind of world. But in fact, in reality, they wanted to erase any sign of existing culture, existing life in Palestine at the time. And of course, as we know, later on in the 1970s or 60s and 70s, many of the Israeli politicians claimed that this was a land with no people, for people with no land. So this culture erasing the culture, it's actually it's also a tool of colonizers to say we're coming. That's what they did. They went to India. When British Empire went to India, they said we're arriving here. We're here to bring modern civilization here. And they came and actually destroyed what was there and tried to impose. And then when they left, they created a division.
Which is part of what Edward Said referred to as the imaginative geography of kind of reinforcing a certain narrative or image and keep repeating it with the aim to kind of suggest that this space lacks modernity and hence justifies a colonial modernity. And unfortunately, what is happening in Gaza now with the constant destruction, it's not only destruction to the physical building, it's also destruction to the infrastructure, the culture, the rituals, the everyday, paving the way for hopefully this will not happen, but it's kind of an ideological destruction to pave the way for a new city to emerge, which certainly the locals, the Palestinians, reject and would like to rebuild. That's why it's very important with this kind of power of impermanence, even if the rebuilding is in fragments, even if it's in small parts, the importance is the will to change and the accumulation of it and the time element that can allow it to grow slowly, because we realize, given the extent of the destruction now, architects will not be able to do the job. It's the people who have to do it at a certain point with the help of the architects.
An excerpt from the exhibition note reads, "In the context of Gaza, the beauty of impermanence stands as a testament to the power of resilience, giving rise to a new facet of the scarred landscape, a new skin that reclaims the right to the city." Does this refer to transforming tools and spaces of oppression into entities that reflect Palestinian resilience and resistance?
It's interesting what you're saying, kind of like, is that a reflection on a colonized context? Not necessarily, because I mean, one of the interesting discussion as the triennial started its introduction, something interesting Leslie Loco mentioned in the interviews, that impermanence may suggest scarcity of resources, but it also equally suggests abundance of skills. So when we talk about impermanence, we do not necessarily need to associate it with weakness or backwardness or passive approach or a reaction. I mean, we are seeing the impermanence as a tool to heal the excessive consumption of resources and destruction to the landscape, and a tool to really heal the landscape and work starting from what we have. When we deal with impermanence in the context of Palestine, there is an urgency, there is lack of resources, there is a need to deal with the rubble that we have in that particular context. Equally, there is an abundance of skill and a lot of creative techniques that happen to be built on the power of impermanence, and therefore we are celebrating that. So for us, impermanence is power. It's a challenge. It's a beautiful challenge, but equally, it's a kind of a creative approach to learn from, not only in the context of Gaza. It happened to be that it's one of the extreme case scenarios that they've managed to work with their available resources. How can we learn from that and shift that skill into the rest of the world and the global north, who we feel has a lot to learn as well from the global south?
Yeah, I think just to continue on that, we always see the relationship between the strong relationship between scarcity and abundance of skills. And that for us, the skills, as Yara said, the development of the new skills or continuation of the existing skills or all the skills and practices, social and cultural practices, that many times the cultural practices, we're not just talking about rituals, we're talking about certain rituals or cultural practices that actually in themselves create, resist scarcity, right? Indirectly, because they have developed over the years. We have developed certain ways of doing things, which actually in itself is environmentally sustainable. And we didn't do it because we sat there and, as some do, and say, oh, it would be nice to be green, so let's just do this. No, it started because there was a need. So these skills, or what I call cultural or practices, alternative practices, which has been developed by us, by others, as an alternative and no option, as Yara said, not a kind of luxury, as no option to the other technology which has been developed, is a form of empowerment. So if we actually take those cultural practices, develop them, and protect them and develop them and reappropriate them to contemporary condition, that is a form of empowerment, because we're empowering the community not to rely on consumer input, not to rely on the outsiders, on the technology that when it breaks down, you have to be a specialist. Technology that you can't repair yourself. You can't go around the corner to the shop and say, well, can you repair this thing? You can't do that. Not if your house is fully sealed, if it's fully air conditioned, if every element is being brought in from somewhere and made by some production, prefab units, etc. So the empowerment is very important. And when we said a new skin, we're offering, in this case, in the case of our exhibition, a new skin, because in many ways you can maintain and protect many elements of your building, but a new skin, it's that new aesthetic which in itself has layers which can actually protect It can be environmental skin, which can be culture skin. But again, it's all about reappropriation, because that's why we can't, obviously, there's no point copying the old, because the old was old. They had deficiencies. That's why other things came and replaced it. But what we need to do, we need to go back to that and say, okay, how do we reappropriate it so that community individuals can be empowered to use that? And that empowerment is also social as well as economical, So when we design, when we're looking at with reconstruction or helping families in, say, in post-conflict condition, we believe that it has to be a bigger strategy. You have to look at the whole neighborhood in order to empower community. It's difficult to empower community if you only empower individuals only. It has to be a bigger scale. So economy has to come into it, street has to come into it. You create a social production within that community, so the community is empowered by the social production.
How does the current state of violence in Gaza change the spatial measures that now need to be taken to impart a semblance of hope and dignity in the region?
Within the context of Gaza and its emergency, because the city has been completely destroyed, the way that we need to read this relationship between neighborhood or role of street, or the definition of what home and domesticity mean, really needs to change, because the way people now are dwelling the city, sadly, 70% of Gaza now is being erased, completely destroyed. The way that people are dwelling the city, the boundary between private and public and inside and outside does no longer exist. So the way we need to read space is very different. We can no longer look at an interior of a home as a cushion and a sofa, because that's not what Gaza is about. It's more about how we deal with an idea of a collective where everybody can get together. How can we read the street to become an extended living room, because it is? How can we read the street to become your home, your room in a way? And that's difficult, that's tough. But that's why when we think about materiality and we think about skin, maybe we are looking into that aspect of layering, dressing and undressing. And maybe we're also talking about a kind of a short-term and a long-term aspect where the idea of home keeps growing and developing, but also in a context where the destruction is happening. We cannot rethink reconstruction in Gaza by simply thinking of erasing the rubble and starting all over again and repeating just a kind of a Western type development where you come with the housing. We are also seeing the rubble, the destruction, and even the artifacts that are being left out in the street as an important ingredient of that layer of the city that we do not want to get rid of. So while part of them become part of that building material of this new skin that we're building, we are also reading the city with its ruins as a key part of the identity of the city and a marker of a memory that we don't want it to be erased.
We should remember that, and I think people should know that the current bombing and genocidal activities that is going on in Gaza, it's not new. It's the extent of it. It's the magnification of it. It is something that's been going on for a long time. And this is not exaggerated. When people say 7th of October was just a pretext, really, that's what it is. 2007, 2008, 2009, bombings that took place, destructions that took place. Actually, the photographs you can just, the images that you will see, you take that image, you just magnify it a bit more, and it becomes 2023. So the condition, in a way, hasn't changed to some extent. Just as Yara was saying, this kind of complete eradication of the private, public, domesticity, neighborhood, etc., and resources. Then it was sieged in 2008-9 when we went to Gaza. There was a siege, nothing could come in. Now it's siege too, except that then there was some aid was coming in. Now there's no water, no electricity, no medicine. It's just magnified, amplified, because there is an anger. There's something there that they just, there's an intention to erase the whole thing. So For us, I think the exhibition was very important. We had, when we were, of course, commissioned to do the work a year ago, and we did the work, and it was based on our experience, because what we were developing was about impermanence, was about new aesthetics, was about alternative way of doing things, which was not only applicable to Gaza, but also applicable to other contexts. But when it came to the coming to the exhibition and actually participating, because the situation changed in 7th of October, and excessive bombing, and we lost members of family, and not only personally, we got impacted quite dramatically, but also continuous images. We were not really sure whether we should go and participate in the event. But the organizers generously, not only they cancelled all the music events in the evening, but also gave us a platform to express and to share our feelings and our situation. So on that basis, we thought we have to go, we have to explain, we have to experience, we have to share our experiences. Now, what was important was the fact that actually, because the question you asked was another question that another person asked me when they were interviewing me in the gallery, like, if you were to do this now, this you prepared this a year ago, if you were to do it now, how different would it be? I keep thinking about it. I think actually there isn't going to be that much different. Okay, the urgency is more urgent. Even then, when we arrived in Gaza in 2010 and 11, we said we need to act 2 levels: short term, long term. In here, we have to do the same. Short term, long term. Short term is much more immediate. It's now, and long term is for us, it's very important that the families have the right to go back and to rebuild their homes. Then the families were there. Now there is another kind of agenda to wipe them out, to push them out. We think what's very important for us, therefore, there's a political, if you like, slogan or act or initiative or activity act, as well as very practical acts. The political act is to make sure they have the right to cities, right to their homes. We need to go and work with the families right now, self-help, to make sure that that pretext, that agenda of wiping them out, is resisted by us going there, working with the families straight away there. And at the same time, we develop. And education it's very important, because, as you said in your previous question about the disinformation at the moment is a poison. It's an ecological catastrophe, disinformation. You see, ecology is not just purely about environment, but it's also mental. There's 3 types, there's ecological, environmental, social, but also psychological, mental. If our mind is poisoned with disinformation, we would not be able to act. We would not be able to actually, then one justifies massacre, one justifies genocide, one justifies erasing of culture, doing all the things that is happening right now in Gaza, in Palestine. So education is very important. And education with the capital E is so very important, because the schools have been destroyed, universities have been destroyed. Many students are unable to continue their practice. So what we're doing, we set up, we were also encouraged when we went to Sharjah, we were encouraged to continue relaunch Architects for Gaza initiative, which includes addressing education as well as homes, as well as this rebuilding, reconstruction. So this situation is just much more urgent, but even more, I think, important because of the intention, the pretext of taking away the whole community. So it's not only the siege, it's more than that now. And I think that's what I would say would be different if we were to do this now. But then anyway, the fact that we were able to use the platform in Sharjah, which kindly were given to us by the organizers, and we really thank them for it. It also showed how many people we were kind of, really overwhelmed with support during those 3-4 days that we were in Sharjah, because there is a need. Professionals feel hurt more, because we can see exactly right now what this means to the houses, to the homes, to their electricity, to their water, to kind of very basic provision that one needs to have to live in a city, where a city has to provide those.
In a world that claims to be post-colonial, Gaza, Palestine are still not. How does your work explore the temporal dimension of the future, keeping these anomalies in mind?
Gaza is still colonized, and we are working in a context that is a post-colonial context, but also in a colonial context. We're kind of sitting in between, if I may say. So there is a lot to learn from Gaza. There is a lot to learn from Gaza that we could apply in a post-colonial context. Within a post-colonial context, I always feel that there is a threshold or a platform to reflect and self-critique and learn from. So I wouldn't say we're not lucky to be in a colonial context. It's such a terrible thing, and I hope that there is a day where we are liberated. But probably shifting between two contexts, being in UK and being in Palestine at the same time, there is a lot to learn from, so we do not repeat. And I feel there is kind of this dialogue, intellectual dialogue, professional dialogue that is going on between us of what to bring, what to apply, how to learn from. But certainly, as we are working in a post-colonial context, we always feel we need to return to contexts like Gaza and Palestine with their creative practices and learn from, because they are really the actual manifestation that the power of the street has managed to create change that architects and planners in a post-colonial context have failed to achieve. That's why we keep returning to that colonial context with its creative practices to learn from. It's a dialectical process, and there is an ongoing conversation, but there is a lot to learn from a colonial context like Palestine, and particularly Gaza, with their innovation and skill. Emerging out of urgency, yes, but certainly abundance of knowledge, skills, and creativity that we are taking back with us to draw attention to.
Yeah, I think for a post-colonial condition to be, if you like, to be in existence in somewhere like Palestine, the colonized has to be able to breathe and be empowered. And otherwise, as it is now, we are in absolutely, as you said, we're in a colonized situation in Palestine and many other parts of the world, actually, especially in the developing countries. So for us to be able to work in a condition, I think, as you said, we're in a position that we cannot afford, we meaning practitioners like us and others that are closely related to Palestine because of our families and everything else. We cannot afford to wait for a post-colonial condition to arrive.
Within a post-colonial context, the colonization of the mind is very strongly embedded, as you mentioned earlier. They're kind of like enforcing certain agenda and certain image double standard. The only thing that we keep stressing on is this right to city, right to resources, right for the community to be empowered, right to self-sustenance, basic human rights that we're calling for, that any ethical context has to be applied. Sadly, we still live in a colonial context, even if the image appears as a post-colonial one. I would like to argue that maybe there is no such thing as a post-colonial. Colonization is really in the details. And within the West, colonization is strongly embedded in everything that it's being done, in the way stories are being said, shared, in the way that issues of human rights, right to city, right to resources is being applied with a double standard in different geographies.
What's next for Palestine Regeneration Team? Where does one go from here?
Given the urgency, we started Architects for Gaza, as Nasser has mentioned. We keep going until the liberation is in place, hopefully. But we initiated Architects for Gaza, and Architects for Gaza is a collective initiative to rebuild. Given the urgency, we felt that we need to get together and call in architects and practitioners from different parts of the world to bring in their skill to build and continue this experimental lab, but also think of creative means to build. So we are hopefully thinking of going back on the ground and thinking of means to rebuild with the local community. but we're also thinking of establishing clusters at different parts of the world, which is already a kind of taking shape nicely, where all of those amazing practitioners that we met in the triennial are joining forces, as well as practitioners from different parts, to bring in their knowledge in.
And I think just continuing, we are right now, the Architects for Gaza is very active. It has an incredible momentum, but we're setting up these clusters in different parts as well as in Gaza. And right now we're developing two typologies, which are, one is off the grid and another one is a typology of actually arts, much more art driven, which we hope that can be practiced and worked with in the communities in Palestine, whether it would be in Gaza or the occupied West Bank, or whether we test some of it here in England or in Europe somewhere. We do tests and then we go there and do that. So the self-help aspect of our work, which is helping families, we call it self-help because it's very important. It's not self-help, because it is about developing with the families, helping the families to develop that self-build with them. So the self-help is actually on the go. And then we have the education cluster, which is we're trying to see how we can address education of the families and children and students and so on who have not been able to complete their education, or they're at the beginning of it or towards the end of it. And so we're pulling in as many, if you like, individuals, and we're contacting institutions, academic institutions, who can help with in different ways, from scholarship to individual tutors who can actually help students to complete their study. So we're very much is about action now, action on the ground. And of course, we were planning to do our exhibition in other places, but at the moment, because of this urgency of situation in Gaza, we are quite focused on that. But we would want to take the message of the Triennale to other places. We hope that we'll have an exhibition and lecture in London and maybe hopefully in other places. But that kind of maybe would be secondary. Perhaps it would take place in the new year. But it's very important for us that not only we practice, but we take the message of the Triennale to other places.
So we're wearing different hats at the moment: practitioners, academic, kind of bringing in the Sharjah Triennial message in, but also we cannot disassociate, obviously, this from the politics. So also us, over 500 architects, professionals, have already signed an action or a statement calling for Gaza right to rebuild, calling for Gaza's right to a city, calling for a ceasefire, urgent ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, so people can go back to their homes, refusing this kind of brutal aspect of genocide and spacocide where the whole city is being destroyed. We as architects and professionals, we feel we also have a responsibility to hold the international community accountable and join forces with us to say stop this injustice, and everybody should be able to speak out. Our main target at the moment is really to look at different scales when it comes to Gaza, looking at the city itself in terms of destruction and how we deal with the big urban fabric, but looking at self-help techniques that can be applicable in different parts of the world.
So we're calling on really internationally to step in, and then we come up with ideas of how we can, how people can help at different levels.